I want you to think of the title of this presentation, Oh my God, in different ways. So you're just going to be watching a little bit of this before we get started.
Like Master Muti, and I really look forward.
You think this is someone with a disability?
We just had the rehearsal and it was a wonderful, beautiful.
Does anyone know?
Together, and I think we will really have fun.
The first of the 4 concert arias by Mozart that Thomas Quasthoff will sing was written by Mozart for the bass Carl Ludwig Fischer, who created the role of Rosmin in Mozart's The Abduction from the Sarajevo.
And here comes our world-class baritone.
Thomas Quasthoff and our guest conductor, Riccardo Muti, the first of 4 concert arias by Mozart for bass, baritone, and orchestra.
So I'll play a little bit so that you hear his singing. So I'm going to switch back to my presentation. That's Thomas Quasthoff, and I'm making that point with you because I want you all to be thinking, you may come with the mindset of, oh my God, who is this student in my classroom? On the other hand, it could be, oh my God, who is this student in my classroom? And so Thomas Quasthoff his mother took thalidomide when she was pregnant. And so all of his limbs were affected. He's about 4 feet tall. It affected his arms and legs. And yet God gave him a beautiful, beautiful singing voice. So how many of you are working with students now that you feel have disabilities? I'm curious. I'm sure that's why you're here. So quite some of you. And then the rest of you, you're just slumming today, or?
They told us we give us cookies.
Oh, that we give you cookies? I don't have cookies. So let me just first of all introduce myself. My name is Rosemary. I'm your speech pathologist, and like all of you, I have been full-time faculty teaching in classes. And so one of the first points I want to make is that disabilities in our students are not always obvious. It is not as if we would have someone like a Thomas Quasthoff who would come in and we would see the physical disability there, or we would see the student in the wheelchair. Many disabilities are hidden. Learning disabilities, autism, psychological disabilities, individuals that are hard of hearing, or other health impairments. You might find that you have a student that's in your classroom who's getting dialysis 3 times a week. So these things are hidden. And so whether you are a professor or at a front desk in a lab, you may ask discreetly, diplomatically, And a good start could be, are you a student with DSPS or in D209? So I see some of you going, oh, it's like you don't want to ask that question. Yes?
Well, I have a student in one of my classes currently.
Yes.
I suspect has some disability based on his speech and his process. And so he was in my office hours. He comes all the time, which I'm very happy about. And we were getting ready to take our second test. He got a D on the first test. And I asked him, I was trying to be as discreet as possible because I don't want to offend him, but I asked him if he's ever had any accommodations, and he didn't know what I meant by that.
Yes.
So then I asked him if he was familiar with DSPNS, and he said no.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was trying to suggest that he might get tested, but I don't want to use the word get tested because I don't want to offend him, so that was really difficult.
So that's actually a great and point for you to bring up, and forgive me, I'm forgetting your name.
Sylvia.
Sylvia, because we worked together before. So yes, you have to have that conversation, and so some of you may feel like, oh, I don't want to ask, are you a student with DSPS? As if DSPS is a bad word. So DSPS is Disabled Student Programs and Services. I'm a person with a disability. I have hearing loss from a benign brain tumor that occurred in 2002. I had radiation for it. So I feel a great companionship with my students, and I will tell you that probably one of the most difficult things for many of us to do if we have a disability, and I'm sure that there's lots of faculty and lots of staff who have disabilities too, is to identify and to self-identify and to state what your disability is. This can be very hard for many students. So this is the question. Are you with DSPS or in D209? Now, if they say yes, that's great, because then you and your student are having that necessary dialogue. One thing you want to do is ask to see the student education contract and a current one. And I'm going to try to see if we can look at one right now. This document viewer, I don't know how people use these. I'm not too crazy with what I'm using, but we'll try to look at it. And what I can do also is pass it around to you as well. So a student education contract, well, looks very, very fuzzy here. Let me see if I can get some more white balance here. Oh. As I said earlier, if you don't have a disability, you'll have it from looking at this. But the student education contract usually puts the proposed classes. And so you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm just going to pass this around. I'm not going to try to toggle back and forth. So I'll just pass this around to all of you. The student education contract is something that we craft, and this is actually a real student education contract. We craft it with the student. We make recommendations of classes. We talk about how they need to come in and see us regularly, who we will liaison with on campus, if they need additional services like psychological services or personal counseling, recommended classes, their study skills, and classroom and test accommodations. So I'll just go ahead and pass this around so some of you can take a peek at it. I've redacted it for the privacy and confidentiality of our student. So if they say, yes, I'm with that, that's great. You can also, again, I can suggest to you, Sylvia, that you could contact our DSPS office to help you. If you have a question, contact us. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question. I have no problem with asking students about PSPS. I did something in the beginning of class which has worked really well. I actually take a lot of time talking about it. I take probably 15 minutes the first day of class.
That's good.
And that's because I think I probably have something that like the whole OCD, ADHD. And I asked to get tested by a previous college years ago, and it was like $2,000.
Oh, yes.
So one of the questions I have is, I think because I feel sensitive that you can't see disabilities, and we have so many students that have so many different things. And I think, for example, like I have a student that I would say is in a disabling position right now because her mother died last month, at the age of 45 years old. So, we were talking about an essay in her eyes. Anyway, the first day of class, I had these little index cards. And I talk a lot about how disabled, I'm an English professor, so I also talk about the word challenged and handicapped and how we've gone through all these changes. And I say, if you have any issue at all, you know, put it on the little index card, approach me after class. And I have so many students who come to me. And so the question that I have, because I'm a teacher and I'm not a student, a lot of them are really concerned that this is going to cost them money. They want to know, you know, I think I do have, you know, a touch of ADD or ADHD, and, you know, but I have no money, and so I don't want them to identify me. Are they going to, you know, do I have to pay for testing? And so what actually happens when they get, the ones that aren't with DSPS yet, and they take the initiative to go there, do they then have to go outside of the school
No.
for this? Or do you
No.
guys test
If they have verification of disability on any level, something even from before, because a lot of times what happens is that students come to us and they have an existing IEP. I don't know if any of you know what an IEP is, but it's an individual education program that is created when a student is accepted into special education after testing. And so if those students come to us from the high schools, then we can verify them right away. However, that then cuts out of the loop many people who may not be identified until they get here to the campus. I remember very well that I had a student in my Speech 3 voice and diction class, and she always talked about, she was in her 40s, and she talked about how hard it was for her to get her you know, bachelor's degree, and she got a master's degree. She was teaching, in fact. And then I suggested to her, because Dr. Weller was still here and had a very large intern program, that she could go through testing, some assessment testing for learning disabilities. Lo and behold, guess what she found out? She did. She had learning disabilities. And when she found that out, she broke down in tears because she remembered how her father always compared her to other siblings in the family, kind of saying she wasn't fast enough or she couldn't do things so quickly, but then she had an understanding of it. So I like your approach. I think that's good because it's very humane, it's very kind. You're trying to be discreet, also not to necessarily expose students and say, oh, well, you look like you have a disability, but to be kindly about that.
So the answer is that they do test for free?
We do some assessment testing, but we have a waiting list because we're a very, very big campus, as we heard Dr. Miller talk about today. I mean, there's about 25 to 30,000 students on this campus. And I would say our DSPS numbers, I keep looking over here to my boss, Bianca Richards, who's our faculty coordinator in the disabled student programs. We have about 1,000 students, yeah. So we're busy, but that doesn't mean we can't provide help. So we'd rather have the students come to us than not. So then the other side of the coin could be, what if the student says no? Okay, and so some of you may have that. And again, that's where you want to tread carefully, just as you were saying, because you may suspect a disability, but how do you broach that topic? And so you may encounter some different mindsets. And one of the mindsets could be, I outgrew it. You know, I had it when I was in middle school. I had autism when I was in middle school. I don't have it anymore. Or I don't want to be identified as disabled. And a lot of students feel that way too. And then mindset 3 is, I don't know. I have no idea. So those are sort of sad mindsets because those are the students that may feel kind of confused and upset and a little bit lost. And I will tell you also, for my own self, when I went through my own little health challenge, I didn't want my students to know that I had had a brain tumor, even, thank God, it was benign. And you know why? Because as a professor, I thought they would think I wouldn't be able to teach. Okay, and then also as a speech pathologist affecting my hearing, I thought, oh, they're going to think I'm not going to be able to hear them. And once I started to identify, oh my gosh, it became so much easier for me. I was able to say to them when they were all talking, can't hear you, you need to repeat, etc., etc. So I think we also set kind of the bar of expectations, and we can do that with a really positive mindset about people with disabilities. So your DSPS is at work always, and we're available to you. We have a front desk, teacher specialists, test accommodations, and assistive technology. And I'm going to go through some of these. Here's Dawn Klingerman, who is part of our front desk, and she's just great. And she has several people up at her front desk who helps, Chris and Genevieve and Marifer. And so you can call us when we're open. We'll take your calls and inquiries. We help to schedule appointments not only for students, but for all of you. We do intakes of brand new students. We do student education contract updates. And then we help to schedule test accommodations, and we accept and return your tests. And we'll talk about all the different things that we do. We are also teacher specialists and interpreters. We are people who provide test accommodations, and we provide assistive technology. There's Bianca. And here's Bianca right there. Yay, Bianca. And so the teacher specialists and interpreters, Ricardo deals with all of our learning disabilities. He took over Dr. Weller's place. Mark Sakata helps with the visual and other health impairments. I've kind of moved into a new part of my career here at PCC. I was teaching a lot in the speech pathology assistant program and only 40% in the disabled student program. Now I'm 80% in the disabled student program, primarily because we have so many students on the spectrum. In fact, I knew I was getting old when I saw one of my students. He's now 6'3", and I remember working with him when he was about 6 years old and walking on his tippy toes and hand flapping, you know, in his K through 5 school, and that was back in another school district many years ago. And then here he is. And the success of that particular student is that he transferred to UC Riverside. Yeah, that's good. So I work with autism and deaf and hard of hearing. We have a new teacher specialist in Rosemary Cervantes. She works with our students with psychological disabilities. And did Rosemary come in? I thought maybe she did. And then Leticia and Tracy help with interpreting services, and you probably see them frequently at graduation because they're doing interpreting at graduation. Yes?
Can you explain what's under psychological disability and interpreting services?
Why Rosemary is under psychological disabilities?
What are the psychological disabilities?
So the psychological disabilities could be anxiety disorder. It could be ADHD, which is attention deficit, and there's many varieties of attention deficit disorders. There could be an inattentive type. There could be a hyperactive type. That's and these students may often be on medications. We can have students that are bipolar. I had a student go through my SLIPA program who was bipolar, and she actually had to go out of the program for a period of time because she was going through a bad kind of a manic phase. And she just had to stop, and I said, that's okay. Gather yourself together. You come back when you're ready. And she did. And I helped her so that she would be able to complete her program. She is a highly successful speech pathology assistant, doing wonderfully. So ADHD, anxiety, bipolar, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, could be Tourette's, many, many different types of disorders.
Does depression fall under?
Yes, depression can fall under there too. And so that's something we have to be really watchful for as well, because many of these students that have these psychological, I can't speak as an expert in this area, but we do have our wonderful counseling psychologists that are here on campus. Dr. Beyer, Dr. Amanda Hahn, they're wonderful, and they also have wonderful interns that work with them as well. They are very skilled in counseling with these students and also making referral to outside agencies and trying to provide personal counseling here. But again, if those students go off their medications, you can see a big change in behavior. And I can remember that as well, that some students I worked with, suddenly they're having meltdowns. And then you're trying to find out what's going on. And so you ask questions, try to help, and then you find out they don't have the medications. So trying to get them to the right spot where they can get them. And then we have our interpreting services, and I think I talked about that as well. So here's test accommodations in D208. Lisa Costa and her staff, Benjamin and Beatrice, are very busy. They keep and give your tests in a confidential, secure environment. So I'm just going to pass around because this document viewer is not doing very well for me. some of the forms that we send out to you, and this little yellow type form is something that you may see a student with a disability come to you and ask questions about your tests. It's very important that we get this information because then we can plan for that. Yes?
Can I ask you something back about the psychological services
Sure.
quickly? Is there any kind of affiliation with them being able to get medication through the school?
No, not really. No. But they can make referrals to outside agencies where they might be able to get medications. So, yes.
I had a student give me that long yellow strip of paper that then never followed up. So before the last test, I reminded him that I would need that accommodations page, and I never did get it from him. Should I just encourage him to go back?
So how much work do we do for the students? I mean, students have their responsibility and we have our responsibility. So I think we really explain to the students that when they're going to have test accommodations, if they've been, if that is part of their student education contract, they have to meet briefly with you, ask you these questions, take that yellow form back and walk it back over to our office to make an appointment to schedule for test accommodations, because typically what Lisa likes to do is schedule for accommodated tests for the entire semester. Yes?
For those of us who teaches foreign languages, and for test accommodation, well, sometimes we have to read questions for comprehension. Do you have people that, in your crew or staff that can read?
These are great questions.
For dictation, ¿cómo estás? Write it down. So.
Yeah, so I mean, I remember one time doing an accommodated test that was an Italian test, and because I have some background as an opera singer, I was able to say, I was able to read the words and to do that. We have some assistance with that kind of thing, but I think if someone gave us a test in Russian, I doubt we'd be able to read that at all.
Well, usually what we do, if there's the dictation part, we have the students stay in class for the dictation part, and then if it's another, like written, or they have to like compose something, an essay, and they need more time, then they can do that. So it could be like a split.
So
they would stay in class for dictation, and then they would come for the other accommodation.
I see. Okay.
Thank you, Bianca. I'm grateful you're here. We also have an assistive technology area in D201. Oh, and let me point this out again. With the test accommodations, remember this little letter here, group of letters, ITL. We're now going to look at assistive technology, and that's also ITL. And our Assistive Technology Center in D201 helps to make text and print and media accessible to all. And so accessibility is really the key issue here. And so we have Alex, who's right here, and he himself is blind, Mark Mintz, and their assistant Cindy, who helps them. And so they may take textbooks and put them out into an alternative format where a student can listen to the textbook rather than have to read the textbook. So how does it work for the student? Very briefly, we begin with verifying of the disability. Then we go to student education contract with the accommodations, both classroom and test. And then the student attends your class, hopefully identifies him or herself, and they use the reasonable accommodations. And this is very important. Remember, no accommodations without them showing you their student education contract. Because a student could come to you and say, oh, I have a disability. I need extra time on test. Well, don't you think most students would like extra time on tests? Mm-hmm. Of course they would. So we have to make sure that it's verified. That's very important. And then I'm going to pass around a verification of disability. This is pretty long, and again, and this student actually, these are real students, I just redacted them. But this student has another health impairment, has cerebral palsy, and has been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Now, Student had assessment testing in D205, which you know all incoming students now have to have done, and scored reading 81, sentence 101, so good in English, algebra 47, and arithmetic 105. So they tested into good higher level classes. And then I usually ask the student, well, tell me about your disability. How do you think that's going to impact you here on the campus? Because they're brand new. They're coming from the high school into the college. It's very different. Well, mostly with anxiety. I have to sit somewhere not surrounded by people. I feel boxed in. Yeah, like sit at the end of a row. I was a little worried about that, talking about completing assignments. I'm used to doing homework. Then I asked him about taking tests, and he said, I'm usually pretty good with that. I may get a little anxious. Articulate and seemed to have good insight about his disability. And when I gave him his initial accommodations back in fall 2013, I gave him the opportunity to sit at the side of a row, you know, so he could sort of have access to the door if he needed to. Allowance for leaving the class if he felt overwhelmed or anxious. Ability to tape record his lectures. And I suggested also to the family that he might need a personal service attendant. We'll talk about that in a bit. And that's kind of like a shadow person who would come when the student was first on campus for the first couple of months. So I'll pass this around. What's interesting to me is to see him now 1 year later, because guess what his grade point average is? 3.714. That's successful. That's what we want. We want to be able to make sure that our students can do well. Now, it's not saying that all students with disabilities are going to do that well. Many of them won't. Yes?
Do any of your students belong to any of the other organizations that have, say, mentoring or things such as LEAP or that sort of thing?
So, you know, some of the students are part of that, and you know, Bianca, do you want to talk toward, because I don't even know what LEAP is.
The mentoring program.
It's the mentoring program?
Yeah.
A mentoring program, kind of, you know, very often you're just kind of a safe house, or where they can use you as a sounding board, or if they're having trouble in a class, you can keep track of, well, why didn't you do the assignment, what, you know, and that sort of thing. It's just kind of a safe house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Links to educational.
Pardon me?
What is it? And now I forgot what I was saying. No, links to educational achievement and progress. I think that's what it's an acronym for.
Yeah. And I was just wondering if they go outside of a DSPS.
Well, some of them do, because some of them may be part of EOP&S, and some of them are Pathways students. That's actually been quite challenging for us, because they meet with the Pathways counselors, you know, Javi or Anna, and they take College 1, and some of them, if they have high enough assessment scores, we know that they'll probably do okay, but then we're aware that, oh my gosh, they've registered for 14.3 units. And we're suggesting a reduced class load. And so I'm glad to see you nodding your head, because a lot of times what I say to them, start smaller. I'd rather you start smaller and be successful than overwhelm yourself with a bunch of classes. And then I always remember what you have always said, Bianca, is that the transcript begins. That transcript follows you. And then, you know, they've got a D or an F and they've got to take a class over again. That's not good. So how does it work for faculty and staff? Well, from your particular viewpoint, you can refer the student or call or email us in DSPS with any concern or question. And then, if the student is a DSPS student, ask to see the current SEC, and then provide classroom accommodations from that SEC as it's been written, like the front seat, the tape recording. I put in for students that they can do screenshots with their cell phones. And I don't know how many of you feel like you like that or you don't, but I use it. because I'm busy trying to write, and suddenly up comes a dense slide, and I've seen a couple people do it in here right today. Somebody took their cell phone out. And by the way, you don't have to do that because I'll provide this PowerPoint for you. Anybody who wants the PowerPoint can have it. But a screenshot could be interpreting, and then they might need, as I said, a PSA or personal service attendant. And then you may need to provide also, in addition to classroom accommodations, test accommodations. And that's by answering the questions from the student on the little yellow sheet that's, I think, going around, and having your quizzes, exams specified in your syllabus with a schedule. Now, I realize, because I teach too, that sometimes your schedule changes, but if you can have it in writing, that helps. And providing that to D208. And always expect appropriate behavior as is specified in the Student Code of Conduct, because here's one of my big takeaways for you today. A disability is no excuse for bad behavior. Yes?
I have a two-part question. And number one, some signs are obvious that, some people have some disability. Are there any hidden signs that, we should look for? And that's the first part of the question. The second part is if we call you and tell you, there's such and such a student a problem, does the student knows that you called?
Not necessarily. You may call and say, I don't know exactly how to work with this student. And the thing is that if the student is a part of our program, we can look and say, this student is with us. So then that's like, okay. And then that gives you another talking point where you can ask the student, if they don't have, let's say, a current student education contract, suggest to them, maybe it's a good idea that you go back and you meet with your teacher specialist to talk about your accommodations. I see you're struggling a little bit. In fact, I met with a professor just, last week, and the professor was concerned because the student was not wanting to show the artwork. It was like an Art 11A foundation drawing class. Didn't want to show the artwork, would kind of close the, whatever she was doing away. And Professor and I talked. I gave her some strategies. Now things are much better. The students began to show some work. And so, again, and this was a complex student with autism as well as psychological issues. But the student has talent. The student has ability. That said, you cannot tolerate bad behavior. So I really feel strongly it's all about being a community on our campus because we are a community college. And it's all about us living in community on our campus. So your DSPS program tries to help you by how we do our intake. We meet with the students. I often meet with parents at the same time. We gather a lot of information, health, education history, psychosocial, their work, volunteer history, interests and hobbies, because sometimes that informs us of what may be good classes for them to take. We also help you by verifying the student's disability. We look if there's an IEP from the high school or middle school, any kind of psychological or assessment testing, and then identifying a diagnosis. And rarely is the diagnosis, this is one thing I see increasingly, it's very rare that people just have one thing that's going on. I mean, sometimes they do. Sometimes the student, they just have a learning disability. But then we've got students with learning disabilities and ADHD, or autism and anxiety. It's like students have many things going on. So we have to be sympathetic to that and listening to it and trying to be of assistance. And we try to identify not only limitations, but I think strengths are extremely important. Most of these students have heard all their life that they were not fast enough, smart enough, couldn't read well enough, couldn't do their math. They've heard all the negatives. So it's always good to see if we can find something that they can do. And listen to how the student reports on their own perception of their disability. And then our observation, what do we observe as professionals? So then we go ahead and create the SEC. I've talked about some of these things. We do offer some speech language assistance. I don't do speech therapy here at PCC, but my program has SLPAs that can help with some of the students with disabilities, and I also have a support group that meets on Friday afternoons from 1 to 2:30, and that's primarily for the students with autism. And then if the student is deaf, they're probably going to have an interpreter in your classroom. You're going to need to close caption your media, and that can be very challenging as well. We can give counselors aids such as registration assistance. Sometimes we provide early registration for some students depending on their disability, career guidance, etc. And we try to liaison with all of you. So I think probably maybe some of you have received emails from me where I've said confidential, and then I put in the subject matter, read DSPS student, and then I said, we have a mutual student. The student's name is blah, blah. How is that student doing in your classes with attendance, assignment completion, quizzes, etc. And then accommodations, again, remember that ITL, it should be reasonable classroom. Typically test accommodations are extended time, a less distracting environment, maybe access to a word processor. What if you had dysgraphia? Okay, or what if your hands were affected by such severe rheumatoid arthritis that you couldn't use a pen and paper? How would you input your information? Okay, maybe you'd use something like Dragon Naturally Speaking and talking to a computer so that you could word process it. Or maybe if you were still able to do some typing, you would do that. And then in some instances, you may need a personal service attendant. So the personal service attendant is like a shadow or an aide, and they may need to come and be with the student. He needs one. You know who that is? That's Dr. Hawking, Stephen Hawking. You know, so he's probably the longest living individual with ALS. He got it very, very young. You wouldn't refuse him coming into your classroom, would you?
How old is he now?
He's in his 70s. Yeah. And so other accommodations may be in large text or print, interpreters or real-time captioning, or maybe an allowance to leave the classroom. And I'll come back to ITL in just a moment, but hold to the standards of your classroom. I really strongly say this over and over again because I think one of the reasons why all of you are here is because you're all really nice people. You're caring, you want to help your students, you're concerned about them. But why tolerate disruption, interruption, excessive disruption, or aggression from any student? You're going to make an excuse for the student who has a disability? I don't think you should. And so I think you must reference the Student Code of Conduct in your syllabus. I hyperlinked this for you. I don't think we have to take the time to go to that now. But you should also reference DSPS in your syllabus, and this is what I put in mine. Students with disabilities who believe they may need accommodations in this class are encouraged to contact the Disabled Student Program and Services in D209 as soon as possible to better ensure such accommodations are implemented in a timely fashion. And so that's my simple quote that I put. So how many of you, are you all teaching faculty? Okay. How many of you put something in your syllabus? Yeah, all of you. I think all of you need to have something in your syllabus so you have that notice for the students. And I would reference also your Student Code of Conduct. I'm waiting for her to finish her screenshot. I'll give you the PowerPoint if you email me. I'd be delighted to. Okay, and then the worst case scenario is you have to do the student misconduct form. So how many of you have ever had to do a student misconduct form? Oh, only a couple of you. Gosh, well, I've been here, well, not that long, but I mean, this is my 15th year, but I've had a few student misconducts. It's not very pleasant. But, you know, sometimes you have to do it. And why? Why did you do it?
The student was kind of aggressive.
Aggressive.
Anytime that he asked questions, or it was becoming disruptive to the point where...
Can you make your voice a little louder?
Sorry. So the student was just becoming aggressive when I would pose a question to the class. It started off as joking, but then like he wasn't getting the laughs he wanted, so he was getting a little bit angry, and he started really being disruptive at any chance he got. And I warned him verbally, but that didn't really do anything because he just kept challenging, and then it became, I want to challenge you any chance I get. And so I had to give him the form. And I just did it really discreetly. I just, because you print it out and you turn in one to the L building and you give one to the student. So I just gave it to him, I slipped it on his desk, and I said, and one of these copies has been turned into the L building. And I just walked away, and that was it. He was fine after that.
Oh, so then the behavior improved. And so sometimes that's what will happen. And so what I say is you don't use this as a hammer with students, but in the sense you can warn them. You can, and just say to them, you know, I'm noticing that you're asking many, many questions, or you are interrupting, or you're blurting things out, whatever the behavior may be, and say, I need to warn you that this is interrupting the flow of our classroom. Because the classroom is not just about this one student, it's about maybe all the 30 or 40 students that are in there. Someone else had to do a student misconduct. Yes, what was yours?
I've had 2 students with brain injuries. And the classes that they take with me is really kind of to rehabilitate their hands, strength, and things like that. And a lot of times I do one-on-one, but throughout the class, so you have like 20 students and you have only so much time. One of the problems is on certain days, if I didn't spend enough time with the individual, then they would get out of hand and angry.
Right.
But the problem, I mean, I must talk with you maybe later, but a lot of this information is new to me.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad.
Yeah, and I'm at the Education Center.
Right, you're at the CEC.
Yeah. So we did fill out forms, and we did have meetings, and eventually the student had to be could no longer come on the campus.
Well, exactly, and so sometimes that happens. Do we feel bad about it? Yes, but then if you look at the collective community of all your students in that classroom, you don't want to ruin their classroom experience, correct? So on occasion that does happen. So I have a link to this student misconduct form. And so what, yes, I'm sorry.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I am new to teaching. I've been teaching for just a month, so maybe this question might be very silly. I have a student who's always interrupting my class because he makes jokes, and sometimes when I ask a question to the whole class, he answers with something completely irrelevant. And last time, this Tuesday, half of the class was laughing and I could not talk anymore. So I told him, could you please stop it? And he was very much scared. So I wonder, should I have waited until the end of the class and spoke to him alone? Or did I do the right thing and say it in front of everyone?
I think you're entirely within your right to say, will you please stop that? Because while the other class is laughing, they're all getting distracted, and it's taking away from your teaching time. And I will tell you, having had to fill out several student misconduct forms, I have had, you know that when a student comes up and confronts you in a certain way, so I had a student about probably 6 or 7 years ago who had an obvious psychological problem, and I later found out how many areas of the campus she was affecting, including even the closing of the Learning Assistance Center. She would wait to the last minute. They'd have to call campus police to get her to leave so that they could close the LAC. So she confronted me in class, and I could suddenly see all 25 other eyes on me and this student. So I just took her outside, and I took her outside of the classroom just to be respectful to her. And I said, I am giving you a warning. This type of aggressive behavior cannot continue. And when we return to class, I need you to use appropriate behavior and polite behavior in addressing me. And so then that ended, because I could tell everybody else is also watching. How are you going to handle this? It's almost like someone's thrown down a gauntlet. You know, it's like, what are you going to do? Yeah, absolutely. And so the thing is that you want to be fair to all of your students. And you are being fair to all of your students if you hold to the student code of conduct. So yes, I think you did fine. And you've had a little...
I don't want anyone to feel attacked, especially
No.
in front of the whole class. But it got to a point that I'm like, I need to talk here. I cannot talk about what it's like.
Well, absolutely. You are the professor, and it's not like you're having comedy night. So you need to be able to teach. Absolutely.
Some people will test you, and the other students are watching, and it all comes down to respect. And if you don't stand up to the student and lay down the law, they won't respect you, and then the other ones will follow like dominoes.
So I'm just going to say something about what I've seen in working with students with disabilities on our campus. They have a really wide range of abilities. Some of them are very verbal, good readers, talk well. Other of them have very fine graphic abilities. They may be artists or musicians. Some are very good with deadlines and what we call executive functioning. They can get their assignments done and they can plan. Others are a mess. Some have sensory motor issues. They can be overwhelmed even by the sound of, the lights or the computer equipment. Fluorescence might really bother them. Some of them have real social and pragmatic issues. If they're on the spectrum, we can understand that. Other times it can be that they just might be a little quirky. But again, remember, we are a community. We're trying to live in a community, so we need to be able to work together. And then some students have very good coping skills, others not so good coping skills. And then the college experience is very different from high school. In high school, there was maybe a special day class or a resource support classroom. Perhaps they had an in-class aide or a shadow who would go with them. And coursework and instruction was modified. We're going to read the Madonnas of Echo Park. It's 25 chapters. That's okay. You can read 10. That's not the way they're going to teach in College 1. Okay? Does anybody in teaching College 1 at all? Yeah, so everybody's expected to read all the chapters of the book. In college, we give reasonable accommodations. We have our DSPS office. We expect our students to be far more independent, and they have to self-manage. And for you as faculty, you cannot modify your instruction. Don't modify your grading. Don't modify the way that you are teaching. Some guidelines also for you. The student with the disability, ideally they identify to you and they show you their SEC. Look at it. Yes?
I guess you may be headed in this direction, which is what do you do when you're dealing with a student who just doesn't have what it takes for your class?
Okay, so do we have students that are on this campus that are developmentally delayed? Because you know why? It's just exactly like Dr. Miller said this morning. He said the community college is the system that allows 100% of any applicant to enter. We cannot close our doors to anybody. So those students may come into your classroom and you may think, oh my gosh, how am I going to work with this student? Now, typically, when parents come in and we see students and we think it's going to be too much for them to be on the main campus, we can steer them to other avenues and venues. But sometimes some parents, and we have students that are even under conservatorship. They are under a legal conservatorship, even limited conservatorship, because they cannot make life decisions for themselves. Is being at the community college the best experience for them? I doubt it, but we can't say no. So that's challenging. You have somebody like that now?
I'll know a little bit more when I finish doing all the midterm grading.
Okay.
But there's the distinction of, is it a learning disability or were they just unprepared or are they just not? So I'm going to have to find out. But there's just sort of some students, they're just not ready for this class.
And what do you teach?
I teach electronics.
Oh. So you have a real skill set that's there.
Oh yeah, like there's things they have to be able to do by the end of my class.
Are there any prerequisites that they have to be able to?
Recommended algebra, and it's actually the math is I can work with them. It's actually a nice field to be working with in math because there are physical things like, okay, you can see the LED getting brighter and that's this type of relationship, and so, but it's so I think it's a good field for people who don't have perfect math skills, but it's not, you gotta have something.
Yes, Absolutely. So your prerequisites are very important. And that's where also I think our English and math assessment testing that we do, which is now required of all students, that's so important. Yes?
I teach a stat class, and for that class it's self-directed placement. So even when I teach on the other campus where I teach, I do have a couple students, and you don't find out until they have to take an in-class exam that, oh, the student is not prepared for this class. So
and so in that instance, what I would suggest is that perhaps you can also be a source of some counseling assistance to the student, where you can actually say to them, you know, I see you're struggling in this class. Do you think there's some other coursework or other class that you need beforehand to help you be prepared for this class? Because I forget what our deadline is to drop with a W. I think it's sometime in November, isn't it? Yeah, in November. So students could still drop a class if they had to and not be penalized. They would just have the W, and far better a W than a D or an F. Gloria?
Yes, you mentioned a couple of times that you sometimes speak with the parents. And I was wondering, as a faculty member, where is my legal status with the Privacy Act? Because
that's right.
At this point, even if I have a student from high school that's 18, I don't discuss anything with the parents.
You're absolutely right. That's right. That's FERPA. You have to follow that. So unless the student is conserved, okay, unless we have, well, if they have a limited conservatorship and it says permission to consult.
Yeah, there's that one. Then the other one, if the student gives you permission to talk to their parents, then you can.
Then I can.
Yeah, but if the students don't give you permission, then you can't talk to the parents.
So if they just take it, they just take it automatically, the parent comes in and wants to talk, or I can still say not without the student's permission.
Yeah, not without your son or daughter's permission.
Be there.
Well,
really?
Well, okay, so that brings up a very interesting. So if you have the student with you and the parent with you, and you say to the student, you know, your parent's here, can I talk to the parent? Well, you're putting the student on the spot.
No, so I want the permission before.
Exactly.
But what I'm saying is usually the student has to also be present, right? That's my understanding with a.
You know, I'd want the student's permission in writing. I would get it in writing, and then then they don't have to be there. They don't have to go through that thing with looking their mom or dad. Yeah. Yes.
So I had a student that basically summarizes a lot of the conversation.
She did what?
He fell in all these situations we're talking about. So
okay.
He's clearly unable to take the class.
Okay.
He's in biology, and it's a class that involves sophisticated lab skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first time he took this class, I gave him a tip, because he starts really well, but when things become more complex, he just loses it completely. He cannot, do these sophisticated things. So,
So she's saying, let me just say, she's talking about how you teach biology.
Yeah.
And she had a student that was starting out in the class, and he was doing pretty well, but as things got
not
more.
really well.
Oh, not.
He was able to follow at some level.
Okay.
But then things became a little bit more complicated, and he just
Start to fall apart.
Yeah, in every sense.
Mm.
Okay? So he got a D in that class because I could not actually fail him. Okay, but these students has never talked to me.
He never even went to your office hours, or did he do tutoring?
We gave him a lot of extra work and things, but I don't know if he's if he ever approached the SPS. And like we said, I didn't know if I had to ask or not.
But you can ask.
I could have asked him. So
Yes.
then he returned the second
Or you could ask
time.
us.
He returned, and I didn't know that. So he returned for the second class, and again, a second time was actually more of a disaster than the first time. So I advised him that it was a good, the blue date was approaching, and he actually withdrew from the class. But then, I got an email from the mother, of him, and then he requesting an appointment. And so we had a meeting, face to face with the mother and him present. And And I think the mother completely understood, you know, what was going on. And she tried to explain to him that probably this career in biology was not exactly his career. And in the course of this conversation, since he's incredibly knowledgeable of a lot of things, you know, if you talk to him about evolution or dinosaurs or all, I mean, amazing. He's just like an encyclopedia of all these things. And I told him that I would see him perfectly in a career like a docent in a museum. You know, he could be in a museum, the Griffith Observatory, and talking about all this. And he scoffed at me several times, saying that was not possible. At this point, I really did not know what to tell him, you know. And so I think he might be back, you know, taking the class for the third time. And I need advice now.
Okay, so all right, so yes, they can repeat. I think they can repeat classes a third time.
Yes.
Yeah, and so then maybe suggest tutoring help. I'm telling students even right now, because we're at the 6th week of the semester. Who's counting? But seriously, tutoring is very important. Yeah. But if he comes back, you want him to be successful. So when I have a conversation with one of my students, and I'm always looking at their transcripts, and I'm saying, okay, so you passed this class, you got to be in that class. Hey, why did you get this D? And I really want to find out what was the reason that they didn't pass the class, because it's like throwing money out the window for them. Plus they're having to do it over again, especially if they're going to proceed. And yes, you're absolutely right. It may not be the career for them. We can't always steer people in a certain direction, but I will tell you that I have had students in my own program, which is the Speech Pathology Assistant program, and I have seen them flounder. I had one student that she got a scholarship from us, and when I looked back at her transcripts from being here at PCC for quite some time, I was appalled because her grades were so terrible. But once she landed in our program, her grades went right up because she felt like she had found what she wanted to do. She landed in the right place for her, you know, and so that's everybody. And so then maybe our Counseling 17 class, that career planning type class, can be helpful. I think also the Counseling 12 is also another class. I think a lot of times we poo-poo these classes. Even the little 1-unit Counseling 10 and 11, they're good kind of introductory classes where students can get their feet wet and figure out, because gosh, when you all started college, did you know exactly what you were going to do? I didn't, you know? I mean, sometimes it's a process. Remember again, no accommodations without verification. Do not modify your course or your grading. Maintain the standards of behavior and discourse in your classroom as you would with any student. And finally, ITL. It's the law. So you have to provide accommodations. If a lot of you may think, oh, I've got this student that's hard of hearing, I have to caption my media. Yes. Okay, or if there's an SEC that says the student is to sit up front in your classroom, yes, okay, because it's the law. And I'll put it to you from this perspective. If it was your son or daughter, your mother or father, or if it were you who had that same disability, wouldn't you want the ability to have equal access? Yes.
Is there a limit to that in terms of, like, I don't know that I could accommodate a blind student because they would have to solder?
So that's a good point. All right, that's a good point. So yeah, if that may be a totally inappropriate class for them to take because they cannot solder. I don't know how we would work around accommodations for soldering. I don't think you could, any more than you could have, let's say, a person that was deaf trying to mix and wear headphones and do sound mixing. How are they going to do that? They don't have the essential abilities to perform the task. Okay, yes?
Question back to this. So, what if, for example, if you want to modify your mode of testing, for example, if they are working on models and the student has disability, but you just give 1 minute per station and they just proceed to the other model, and they say, okay, she has disability, and you have to provide more time. But you cannot provide more time because it's back-to-back class, and you are here just 2 days, and models are just there for that 2 hours. And this is my first question. And second, if I want to modify that, I know in other institutions that I teach, they say you don't have to modify that because we did our job in terms of like they study their student and they see if you modify by extra time or giving them printout, SLO doesn't meet. So it is defaulting the SLO. So how do you discern that?
That's actually a really good question. So if you're talking about in terms of a testing situation,
extra time testing, somehow I have to modify, right? Because you say it is locked.
yeah.
But in other words, we say it is defaulting the SLOs because student learning is not coming out. As she was saying, she's not getting the grade.
Okay. Bianca, do you?
It depends. Are you, so what are you testing for?
For example,
for
I
time
teach,
or
no, for example, anatomy lab, and they have 1 minute per station, they should identify, let's say, this model.
Right, so then let's say, I know like the analogy would be like in the math. So if there's 20 questions and they can do 10 of them, then you would test on the 10. So like if they're having to identify in the anatomy lab 5, I don't know, body parts, and you can modify it and maybe they have to identify correctly 3. So you can, so it just depends on what you're testing for. Are you testing for time? Are you testing for content, knowledge, and ability? And it's a hard call, just like in, so some labs we can't move the labs into our test accommodations, so then we try to work with the professors to find out what is it that you're wanting to get out of the testing. Because we're not going to bring a chemistry lab to our office.
No.
So then we would work with the professor that they have to identify, or they have to have this safety mixture procedure.
Yeah, because it's still for me it's very confusing because if I give the printout and I send to you to your department, say, okay, instead of model itself, let them look at the picture, but they say at the end it is not doing what you are expecting to do. So I don't know
From the
because the standpoint of student learning, and this is not something I say based on the research that they did, and as a faculty they told us no, you cannot do that. Of course, not here in other institutions, and it's very interesting for me what will be your approach.
Yeah, so what I would love for you to do is to email me. My email will be at the end of this presentation, and we're going to take this back and kind of work through it.
A student with disability, but it is always.
Oh, you may.
What would I?
Yes, of course, of course.
I cannot change my mode of testing. That's the thing, and.
Yes.
Rosemary, we just met the other day.
Yeah.
I also teach human anatomy, and I've got a workaround for this because I've had students need to come for accommodation that couldn't do it in your facility that way, so we can talk. Okay. I'll give you the secrets.
Oh, well, I want to know what they are too. Okay.
Well, there's always workarounds, and there's and also when we work with the professors, we trust that you guys know your stuff. We don't know electronics, we don't know anatomy, we don't know a lot of the nursing stuff. So we'll listen to you, and if you can provide a reasonable accommodation in the classroom, go for it. So we're not wanting the students to come over to do the accommodations. If you can do a workaround, if you can do something, and the student has access to the same material, you're getting from the student the same kind of knowledge, content that you need, then go for it. We can give you the power to do that.
So we're getting towards the finish point here. How many, what do you see in this picture? Oh, everybody knows it. Okay, now how many of you see an old lady? How many of you see a young woman? How many of you see both? Okay, and so why I bring this picture here is it depends on what you're looking at. Okay, that's very important. And so one of my dear friends, Lisa O'Connor, gave me a t-shirt that said, "Attitude is the real disability." And our attitudes will speak before we have ever said an actual word. I like this one. Please don't interrupt me while I am ignoring you. So. And a final thought about this. I mean, I feel all of us are one banana peel away from a disability. And just because we do all this with a student does not equal automatic success. It's a joint and continuing process. Some students do not take advantage of services that we offer, not only in DSPS, but on the campus. We have all these tutoring labs. Some students have really unrealistic expectations, like your example of the student that maybe biology is not the right field for him. And some students are not meant for the college experience as what your example was. And some students just don't do the work required, nor do they manage their time well. And for me, this is critical. This is true for all students, regardless of disability or not. So, questions by anybody? I think yes, go ahead.
You guys have the facilities, so for example, if I have a student who requires double the time for an in-class exam, and I'm an adjunct, so I'm not going to have 4 hours to sit with.
Exactly.
Is there a way I can give you guys the test?
Absolutely. So the way test accommodations work is that the student has to come to you, identify that they're with DSPS, meet with you briefly to find out when your tests are and have you fill out that yellow questionnaire. And then the student comes back and books an appointment with us in D209. And so this is this little form. Has the student shown you that?
No, she just showed me a white form with,
that one.
Okay, this one right here?
I think it was like that.
Okay, very good. And then if you have that on your, if you have your schedule of all your tests and when they're offered on your syllabus and your schedule, then that student comes back and we try to book it for the entire semester, okay? And we have a nice big area now in D208 where we're able to handle the extra time for testing. The usual is 50% extra time. Yes, of course. And also our proctors who proctor, oh, you saw this one? The students are proctored. We make sure that there's no cheating that's going on. We make sure also of the confidentiality and the security of your tests. Very important. Anybody teach at Rosemead? Yeah, so that's challenging because Rosemead, I guess the way that Lisa's been receiving all the accommodated tests is through electronically. I guess they're PDF'd kind of back and forth because I don't think they deliver the mail too often, like once a week. Yeah. So, somebody else had, yes?
I have like two students that maybe not really the learning disability, but then I think their attitude is definitely immature. And I think maybe this combined with the learning disability, they always try to get attention from me or from other students, and so it's and sometimes want to have an earphone, and he said he cannot focus without music, and sometimes that we are learning some very important things and fall asleep. When he woke up, he asked questions. It caused a
disruption.
Yeah. What do you call this?
I don't know what to call that. I mean, inattention. And so in an ideal world, what the student is going to do is to come up to you, and what is your name? Okay, so Professor Chen, my name is Rosemary Scott, and I have a hearing loss, and I need to sit up front in your classes so that I can listen to you, and I may need to tape record in your classes. That's the ideal world, that the student goes to you, or they identify, they're able to say what their disability is and what they need. Whether that's going to happen, I don't know, but you can ask. You can go back to what I said at the beginning of the presentation.
I think a lot of, I at least don't have my master's in education. I have my subject matter domain, but I'm wondering if there's a book that you recommend that has sort of like tactical strategies for new teachers on how to handle disruptive students.
Oh, I don't know if I have anything like that. Sometimes I feel like I'm constantly trying to think of new ways to do things because I have things that happen in my classes that I'm always thinking, I can't believe this happened. It's like, yeah, it's like Dorothy Parker, what was her great comment? What fresh hell is this? You think to yourself, what's going on now? But well, my basic thing is exactly kind of what we were listening to this morning, that we listen to each other and try to communicate. And so try to ask good questions, observe. If you're stuck, come to us in D209, talk to us, and then try to talk to your student. Yeah. Okay, yes.
Yeah, I have one, I teach ESL, and he gave his first speech, and I knew this was going to be an issue because the two administrative assistants said to me, "We're giving him to you. We think you could figure this out." So I knew I have to really listen. So last week I finally had a meeting with him in which I said, "I feel like it's in your palate, somewhere in the back. Is it there? Do you know about it?" So he said, "I have a hole in it."
Oh, he has a cleft palate?
It's not visible from the front, but it's...
Like a fistula?
I'm not sure.
Oh, does he have a repaired cleft palate?
Not visible.
Not visible.
I think it's very, very rare.
Is he very nasal like this?
Kind of like beyond that because of the English issue.
Oh, and then you articulation with it. Yeah, that's very challenging. So,
I have my own strategy. I'm an actor for 50 years.
I can tell.
That's helpful, but trying to reprogram how he speaks in order for the rest of us to understand him for the rest of my life, that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah,
The thing is, though, because I teach ESL as well, is that student is not articulate even in his own language.
Right.
So you're not going to make him super articulate in a second language. He is inarticulate at this point.
Mm-hmm. And actually, that's one of the big kind of guidelines for me as a speech pathologist. I really look at intelligibility. If a student is unintelligible, just generally, I don't care if people have accents. They could have a very charming accent, and if I can still understand them, fine. What I'm more concerned about is what is their level of intelligibility. So you could certainly send him over to my office, and I'd be glad to look inside his mouth and look at his palate and see and we'd probably qualify him for services. Now, at that point, what would he do? He would probably need a lot of assistance. And by assistance, I mean probably tutoring. I might refer him over to Cal State LA. They have the Robert L. Douglas Speech Clinic, which is very low cost, where he could get some support there. But, as an adult, if he's got a cleft...
He's 68.
Oh.
He's fossilized. No, that's a linguistic terminology. I'm not being disrespectful. His language is fossilized.
I don't give up on any fossilization.
Okay, well, so you guys were a great group. Thank you so much. Lots of good questions. Good. And email me if you want my presentation.
Yes,
yeah,
okay.
That's true. And you can also email. Yeah, there we go. Okay.